My name is Natalie Grant. I am 28 years old. My parents charged me rent when I was 14, while my brother lived rent-free until he was 35. They always told me boys just need a little more time to figure things out. Last week, the IRS knocked on their door holding a thick manila envelope. The file had my name printed in bold black letters right across the front. My dad dropped his drink the second he saw the federal badges. Before I explain how my own family set me up for a federal prison sentence, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the Eva Tells Stories channel. Drop a comment below telling me your age and where you are listening from right now. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to last Sunday evening at my parents' house in the Illinois suburbs. I rarely visit them. Sunday dinners are an exercise in endurance. The dining room smelled like dry pot roast and lemon pledge. My mother Susan was scraping her fork against her china plate. My father William watched a muted football game on the living room television. My older brother Derek sat across from me, tapping his thumbs on his phone screen. He is 35 and still sleeps in the finished basement downstairs. The doorbell rang. It was not a polite chime. Someone pounded on the wood framing 3 times. Hard. My father sighed and pushed himself up from the table. He walked down the hall and pulled the front door open. The yellow porch light caught the reflection of something metallic. I leaned back in my chair to get a better view. 2 men in dark suits stood on the welcome mat. One of them held up a silver badge. Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation. We are looking for Natalie Grant, the CEO of Apex Consulting, LLC. I froze. I own a public relations firm in downtown Chicago. I have never heard of Apex Consulting in my entire life. I pushed my chair back and stepped into the hallway. The glass of beer in my father's hand slipped through his fingers. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered. Amber liquid and sharp glass scattered across the rug. He did not look down. He just stared at the agents with hollow eyes. My mother scrambled out of the dining room. She shoved her way past me and tried to wedge her body between the open door and the hallway. "Officer, there must be a mistake," she said. Her voice was too high. Her breathing was shallow. "This is just a clerical error. You have the wrong house." The second agent did not blink. He held out the thick manila folder. He bypassed my mother and extended his arm directly toward me. "Are you Natalie Grant?" he asked. I nodded and took the file. The paper felt heavy in my hands. I flipped the cover open. The first page was a federal tax warrant. Right below the name of a fake company, I saw my own Social Security number printed in stark black ink. I looked up at the people who raised me. My mother was gripping the edge of the hallway table. My father refused to meet my eyes. The black ink of my Social Security number blurred on the crisp federal paper. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Standing in that quiet suburban hallway, the smell of my mother's lemon furniture polish seemed to curdle in the air. It turned sharp, acidic. It morphed into the distinct burning scent of industrial floor bleach. Suddenly, I was not 28 years old standing in front of 2 federal agents. I was 14 again. The memory hit me with physical force. I could feel the rough wooden handle of a commercial mop pressing into my calloused palms. It was a Tuesday night. The neon open sign buzzed a relentless red glow through the greasy front window of a roadside Illinois diner. My knees ached from scrubbing spilled ketchup and dried coffee off the cracked linoleum tiles. I was making a few dollars an hour, plus whatever loose change the truckers left behind the sugar dispensers. I paused my scrubbing to wipe sweat from my forehead. Headlights cut through the dark parking lot. A pristine, forest green Jeep Cherokee pulled into a spot reserved for paying customers. The engine cut out, and the driver's side door swung open. It was my brother Derek. He was 17. The Jeep was a birthday gift from our parents. They paid the insurance, they paid the registration, they even bought the custom leather seat covers he begged for. He strolled into the diner wearing a brand new designer jacket. The little bell above the door chimed cheerfully announcing his arrival. He did not look around at the empty booths or the tired waitress wiping down the counter. He walked straight toward me, stepping right onto the wet floor I had just spent 20 minutes cleaning. His pristine sneakers left muddy tracks across the linoleum. "Hey, Nat," he said. He offered a lazy half smile. "I need a favor." I leaned my weight against the mop bucket. My uniform shirt was damp with dishwater. "What do you need, Derek?" "I'm running on fumes," he said. He tapped his pockets like it was a funny joke. "Mom forgot to leave cash on the counter this morning, and I'm supposed to meet some guys down at the lake. Spot me a 20. I stared at him. A $20 bill was an entire evening of clearing plates and dodging unwanted comments from late-night patrons. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out a crumpled wad of single-dollar bills. It was everything I had earned that night. I counted out 20 singles. He snatched the money from my hands without a simple thank you. He turned around and walked out, leaving me to remop his muddy footprints. That was just the prelude. The real betrayal always happened when my shift ended. I remember walking through the front door of our house that night. My legs felt like lead. The television glowed in the living room where my father slept in his recliner. My mother, Susan, sat waiting at the kitchen island. She wore a silk bathrobe, sipping a glass of red wine. She did not ask how my night was. She did not ask if I was tired or hungry. She simply tapped her manicured fingernail against the granite countertop. "Time to settle up, Natalie." I pulled the remaining crumpled dollar bills and a handful of sticky quarters from my pocket. I laid my earnings on the cold stone. $36.50. It was the sum total of my physical labor. Susan reached forward. Her fingers sorted through the bills with practiced efficiency. She separated $10.95, pulling it toward her side of the counter. 30%. She called it rent. I was a freshman in high school. I shared a bathroom with a brother who left wet towels on the floor, and I ate the same cheap groceries as everyone else. But I was the only one paying to exist under that roof. "Mom, I need that money to buy school supplies," I said. My voice trembled, but I tried to hold my ground. "Derek does not pay rent. He does not even have a job. Why do I have to pay to live in my own house?" Susan did not look up from her wine glass. She smoothed the wrinkled dollar bills into a neat stack. "Your brother is different," she said. Her tone was light, airy, and entirely devoid of empathy. "Boys need more time to mature, Natalie. The world is hard on young men. They face different pressures. You need to learn financial responsibility early. Consider this a lesson in the realities of life." The sheer injustice of those words carved themselves into my brain. Boys need more time to mature. That was the mantra that governed our entire household. Derek was allowed to drift, to fail to consume resources without consequence. I was expected to produce. I realized very early that I was not viewed as a daughter. I was a revenue stream. But I refused to be a silent victim. The very next day, I walked to a local office supply store before my diner shift. I spent 2 of my hard-earned dollars on a small carbon copy receipt book. It had a blue cardboard cover and perforated pages. When I came home that night and laid my tip money on the granite island, I placed the blue book right beside it. I had filled out the date, the amount of my 30% cut, and the purpose of the payment: rent for child bedroom. Susan frowned at the book. "What is this?" "If I am paying rent, I want a receipt," I told her. "I need you to sign it." She laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Do not be ridiculous, Natalie. Just give me the cash." I pulled the money back. No signature, no rent. "I am learning financial responsibility, just like you said." Her jaw tightened. Her eyes flashed with genuine irritation. But she grabbed the pen from the counter. She scribbled her name across the bottom line, pressing so hard the carbon paper bled through to the next page. She tore the white copy out and threw it at me before snatching the cash. Every single week for 4 years, I made her sign that book. When she was busy, I made my father sign it. I took those little slips of paper and folded them away. I hid an old shoebox under my bed behind a stack of winter sweaters. Every signed receipt went into that box. It was my secret ledger. A physical record proving that I bought my own survival in a house that should have protected me. That shoebox did not stay under my childhood bed. When I moved out at 18, I packed it. It traveled with me to cramped college dorm rooms. It sat in the closet of my first studio apartment. Today, that exact shoebox sits inside a plastic storage bin in the utility closet of my Chicago high-rise. A pristine, archived history of my early financial separation from William and Susan Grant. A history written in their own handwriting. The memory faded abruptly. The smell of bleach evaporated, leaving only the sterile scent of my parents' hallway. I blinked, staring down at the thick manila folder in my hands. The federal tax warrant glared back at me. The IRS agents stood like statues on the welcome mat. My mother was still grasping the hallway table, breathing in rapid, shallow gasps. My father had retreated a step, his eyes darting toward the living room window, like he was looking for an escape route. The dots connected in my mind with terrifying clarity. The financial abuse had never actually stopped when I packed my bags and left this house 10 years ago. It had merely evolved. They stopped taking 30% of my diner tips. Instead, they took the 9 digits of my Social Security number. "Ma'am," the first agent said, breaking the heavy silence. His voice carried the weight of the federal government. "We are going to need you to come down to the field office on Monday morning. You have 72 hours to procure legal counsel." I closed the folder. The paper felt like sandpaper against my skin. I looked past the agents toward the staircase leading down to the basement. I could hear the faint, muted sounds of a video game echoing up from the subterranean room where my 35-year-old brother slept rent-free. The boy who needed more time. I turned my gaze back to my mother. She was staring at me, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading look. She wanted me to fix this. She expected me to protect them. A new realization began to claw its way into my chest. This was not just a mistake. This was a calculated trap, and I needed to know exactly how deep the rabbit hole went before I made my next move. The heavy oak front door clicked shut. The metallic latch snapping into place sounded like a gavel striking a judge block. 72 hours, the deadline echoed in my mind. 3 days to report to a federal field office downtown. 3 days to explain undocumented revenue streams I knew nothing about. The suburban silence flooding the hallway felt suffocating. My father, William, remained rooted to the floor. He stared blankly at the empty space where the 2 suits had just stood. A shattered beer glass lay ruined at his feet. Puddles of amber liquid soaked deep into my mother's prized floral runner rug. He made no effort to clean it. He just breathed in ragged, uneven bursts. Heavy, lethargic footsteps thumped against the wooden stairs. The basement door swung open with a slow creak. Derek emerged. He blinked and shielded his eyes against the harsh overhead hallway lighting like a creature unaccustomed to the sun. He wore a faded gray college hoodie and stained athletic shorts. At 35 years old, my older brother possessed the slouching posture and petulant attitude of a bored high school sophomore. He lived entirely underground in a windowless room surrounded by high-end gaming consoles, dual monitors, and empty energy drink cans. He paid 0 utility bills. He bought no groceries. He contributed $0 to the household economy. We were raised under the exact same roof, but we occupied 2 different universes. While I woke up at 5 every morning to manage crisis communication for high-profile corporate clients in a sunlit Chicago high-rise, Derek woke up at noon to argue with teenagers on internet message boards. He scratched his stubble and let out a loud yawn. "What is all the shouting about?" he asked. His voice was thick with lethargy. He stepped carefully over the shattered glass on the rug. He did not offer to fetch a broom. "Did somebody drop a drink?" My mother snapped out of her frozen trance. Susan dropped to her knees on the hardwood floor and began scooping up the jagged glass shards with her bare hands. "It is nothing, sweetie," she said to Derek. Her tone shifted instantly. The panicked tremor vanished, replaced by a sickeningly sweet, nurturing cadence she reserved exclusively for him. "Just a door-to-door salesman. Your father had a clumsy moment. Go back downstairs and relax." William cleared his throat. He ran a trembling hand over his thinning hair and nodded stiffly. "Right," he muttered. "Just a salesman. A minor misunderstanding. Nothing to worry your mother about." I stood there clutching the manila folder. My brain struggled to process their casual deception. A pair of federal agents had just handed me a tax warrant for a company I did not own. They gave me an ultimatum to answer for phantom crypto gains. And my parents were treating the event like a spilled glass of iced tea. I looked down at the thick file in my hands. Apex Consulting, LLC. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. It felt foreign, and yet the underlying deception carried a terrifyingly familiar weight. My mind raced backward, sifting through years of forced holiday dinners and uncomfortable family gatherings. A specific memory bubbled to the surface, cutting through the fog of my panic. It was Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. We sat around this very same dining table. William had carved the turkey with his electric knife. Susan had poured expensive wine into crystal goblets. Derek was complaining bitterly about his latest failed business venture. He wanted to flip distressed real estate, but no bank would approve his commercial loan application. He had defaulted on 3 separate credit cards. His debt-to-income ratio was a disaster. William had pointed a grease-covered carving knife in my direction. "Natalie has an 800 credit score," he chuckled, taking a sip of his wine. "She is practically swimming in good credit. Maybe she should co-sign for your new condo, Derek. Keep the wealth in the family instead of paying some bank manager." I had forced a polite smile. I carefully changed the subject, asking Susan about her garden. I assumed his comment was just another tone-deaf joke. Another subtle, bitter dig at my hard-won financial independence. My parents resented my success because they could not control it. But standing in the hallway with a federal warrant burning a hole through my palms, the true meaning of that Thanksgiving dinner hit me. It was not a joke. It was a stress test. They were probing my defenses. They suggested I co-sign for a loan because they already knew exactly how pristine my credit history was. They knew because they were already using my Social Security number. The air in my lungs turned to ice. I stepped closer to my mother. She was still kneeling on the rug collecting the last few shards of broken glass. "What is Apex Consulting?" I asked. My voice was low. It did not shake. Susan did not look up from the floor. "I told you, Natalie, it is a clerical error. The government makes paperwork mistakes all the time. People get their files mixed up. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division does not make house calls for simple clerical errors," I said. "They do not hand out 72-hour deadlines for a misspelled name." "Whose company is this?" Derek leaned his shoulder against the wall. He crossed his arms over his chest and let out a heavy sigh. "Why are you yelling at Mom?" he demanded. "You are stressing her out. Just call the phone number on the paper tomorrow morning and clear it up. It is probably just some identity theft scam from a hacker in Russia." I shifted my gaze to my older brother. He looked incredibly bored. He seemed entirely unbothered for a man whose sister had just been served with federal papers. But there was a faint tightness around his eyes, a subtle, rapid shifting in his jawline. He was trying very hard to appear indifferent and failing. "I am not calling anyone until someone in this room tells me the truth," I said. I raised the manila folder higher. "My Social Security number is printed on this warrant. The registered address listed for this fake company is this exact house. You expect me to believe a random internet scammer picked my name and your mailing address by sheer coincidence?" William finally spoke. His voice was gruff, trying to project authority he no longer held. "Do not interrogate your mother in her own home, Natalie." Susan stood up. She brushed the dust off her slacks. She leveled a stern, disapproving glare in my direction. It was the exact same glare she used when I was 14 and had the audacity to ask to keep my own tip money. "You are always so dramatic, Natalie," she sighed. "You take every little hiccup and turn it into a theatrical production. Your father will call our accountant in the morning. We will sort out this mess for you. Now please put that silly folder away and come sit down at the table. The pot roast is getting cold." She turned her back on me and walked into the dining room. She expected me to follow blindly. She expected me to fall back into line, assume my role as the compliant daughter, and accept her narrative without a single question. The sheer audacity of my mother's dismissal sent a cold shockwave down my spine. She called it a hiccup. A federal tax warrant threatening my freedom and my business was just a minor inconvenience ruining her Sunday dinner. I looked at my father, who was now diligently cutting his meat, refusing to glance in my direction. I looked at Derek, who had already returned his attention to his glowing smartphone screen. They were a united front of denial. They operated under a shared delusion where my life and my reputation were secondary to their comfort. I took a slow, deep breath. The anger inside me began to crystallize. It hardened into something sharp and precise. I did not need their permission to uncover the truth. I had the name of the company. I had my own identification. I had everything I needed to dismantle their lies. The obedient daughter died a long time ago. I stood in the hallway listening to the clink of silverware as my family resumed their dinner. I realized then that demanding answers from them was entirely useless. They would spin webs of lies to protect their basement prince until the bitter end. If I wanted to know how deep this deception went, I would have to bypass them. I squeezed the folder tightly against my chest. I turned on my heel and walked toward the front door, leaving their dry pot roast behind. I needed a quiet place and a secure internet connection. I needed to log into the state business portal and see exactly what secrets Apex Consulting was hiding. The drive from the suburbs back to downtown Chicago felt like a prolonged nightmare. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel tight enough to make my knuckles ache. The highway streetlights swept across the windshield in a hypnotic, repeating rhythm, but my mind raced 1,000,000 miles a minute. Every passing police cruiser made my breath hitch in my throat. Hypervigilance set in, clamping down on my nervous system. I checked my rearview mirror constantly, half expecting flashing red and blue lights to pull me over. I was a fugitive in my own life, and I did not even know the details of my supposed crime. I pulled into the underground parking garage of my public relations firm. The concrete walls echoed the low rumble of my engine. It was late Sunday night, and the building was a ghost town. The elevator ride to the 14th floor took an eternity. The polished chrome doors slid open, revealing the quiet, dark lobby of my agency. I did not bother turning on the overhead lights. I walked straight to my corner office, relying entirely on the ambient glow of the city street lamps filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I dropped the manila folder onto my glass desk. The paper landed with a soft thud. I booted up my computer. The monitor illuminated the dark room with a stark, unforgiving blue light. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. I opened a web browser and navigated to the Illinois Secretary of State business portal. My heart hammered a frantic beat against my ribs. I typed in my Social Security number. The 9 digits felt like a loaded weapon aimed directly at my own chest. I took a sharp breath and clicked search. A loading wheel spun on the screen for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, the results populated the page. Apex Consulting, LLC. Status? Active. Registered agent? William Grant. Principal owner? Natalie Grant. Date of incorporation? April 2020. I scrolled through the digital filings, clicking on the public records. My eyes scanned the blurry, uploaded documents. My signature was forged on the bottom line of the operating agreement. It was a clumsy imitation of my handwriting, but close enough to pass a casual bureaucratic glance. I clicked on a secondary tab labeled Federal Disbursements. A new PDF document opened. The header bore the official seal of the Small Business Administration. The text spelled out a grim, horrifying reality. Paycheck Protection Program loan application. Status: approved. Disbursement amount: $150,000. The oxygen left the room. My lungs refused to expand. I stared at the 6 figures glowing on the monitor, unable to blink. This was not just a clever tax shelter to hide my brother's day trading gambling debts. This was grand theft. During the height of the global pandemic, when legitimate small businesses were fighting just to keep their doors open and their employees fed, my parents had fabricated a ghost company. They used my pristine financial record to siphon relief funds from the federal government. The scale of the betrayal paralyzed my limbs. Defrauding the Small Business Administration was not a minor slap on the wrist. It was a severe felony. It carried mandatory federal prison time. My parents had quite literally forged my name onto a federal crime to secure $150,000. Where did the money go? Did it fund Derek and his endless stream of failed real estate ventures? Did it pay for the new designer kitchen appliances in my mother's house? They ruined my credit score and engineered a legal trap that could destroy my entire future. They served me up on a silver platter to the Internal Revenue Service, just to keep their basement-dwelling son comfortable. A sudden noise broke my concentration. The heavy glass door to my office clicked open. The hallway light spilled across the carpet, casting a long shadow into my dark sanctuary. I jumped in my leather chair, startled by the unannounced intrusion. Maya, my business partner, stood in the doorway. She held a stack of campaign folders and a lukewarm cup of coffee. She wore her typical late-night attire, consisting of yoga pants and a messy bun. We often worked odd hours to accommodate international clients, but I did not expect to see her in the office tonight. "Natalie, you look like you just saw a ghost," Maya said. She stepped into the room, her brow furrowed in deep concern. "Why are you sitting in the dark staring at a screen? Are you okay?" I reached forward and swiftly closed the laptop. The monitor faded to black, hiding the incriminating loan documents from her view. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I forced my facial muscles to relax. I pasted on a calm, professional smile. I drew upon years of corporate crisis management training, burying the terror beneath a veneer of mild annoyance. "I am fine, Maya," I said. My voice sounded steady, much steadier than I felt inside. "Just dealing with a minor family emergency. My parents had a small issue with their house, and I had to drive out to the suburbs. I came up here to grab a client file before heading home." Maya tilted her head, studying my rigid posture. "You are gripping the edge of your desk like you are bracing for an earthquake," she pointed out. "You know you can talk to me, right? If something is wrong with the agency financials, we can fix it together. It has nothing to do with the firm, I promised." I kept my tone light and dismissive. "Just annoying suburban drama. You know how my mother gets about home repairs. Go back to the Johnson account. I will review your press release drafts first thing tomorrow morning." Maya hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "All right, just do not burn yourself out. Get some sleep, Natalie." She backed out of the room and let the heavy glass door swing shut. The metal latch clicked softly into place. I let out a long, trembling breath. My hands released their death grip on the edge of the glass desk. I was alone again. The silence of the office rushed back in, pressing heavily against my eardrums. Maya was my closest friend. We built this firm from the ground up through sheer willpower and countless sleepless nights. I wanted nothing more than to break down, tell her everything, and ask for her help. But I could not trust anyone with this secret. If word leaked that the CEO of a prominent Chicago public relations agency was under federal investigation for pandemic relief fraud, our clients would terminate their contracts by sunrise. My reputation would evaporate overnight. The business I bled for would crumble to dust. More importantly, sitting in the dark office, I realized a terrifying truth about my blood relatives. If I confronted my parents with this SBA evidence, they would not apologize. They would panic. They would shred documents, delete hard drives, and wipe any physical trail connecting them to the crime. They would ensure I took the full fall to protect their precious golden boy. They viewed me solely as a shield meant to absorb their consequences. I had to play a very dangerous game. I could not scream at them. I could not confront them with righteous anger. I had to smile. I must pretend to be the obedient, terrified daughter they expected me to find. I needed to operate in total, absolute secrecy. I needed to gather my own legal ammunition before the federal trap snapped shut on my neck. I opened my bottom desk drawer and placed the manila tax warrant inside, turning the small metal key to lock it safely away. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. But first, I had to endure whatever manipulative narrative my mother was currently concocting to save herself. I stared out the window at the glittering Chicago skyline, knowing the storm was already here. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, casting sharp geometric shadows across my glass desk. I had slept for exactly 0 hours. The dark circles under my eyes required a heavy application of concealer. My coffee tasted like battery acid. The clock on my computer monitor read 8:30 a.m. I was currently researching federal criminal defense attorneys when the sleek black intercom on my desk buzzed. Natalie, the receptionist, said. Her voice carried a hint of hesitation. Your parents are down here in the lobby. They do not have an appointment, but they are insisting it is an emergency. They say they need to see you right now. My stomach dropped. An icy chill radiated outward from my spine. They were moving fast, much faster than I anticipated. They did not wait for a phone call. They drove all the way from the suburbs directly to my downtown office during morning rush hour. They were terrified. And a terrified animal is incredibly unpredictable. Send them up, I told the receptionist. Keep my tone even professional. Offer them water and show them directly into my private conference room. Do not let them linger near the client waiting area. I took a final swig of the terrible coffee, smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, and walked down the hallway. The conference room walls were constructed entirely of frosted, soundproof glass. I pushed the heavy door open. William stood near the window overlooking the chaotic traffic below. His arms were crossed tight across his chest. Susan sat in a leather ergonomic chair. She clutched her expensive designer handbag like a shield. As soon as the door clicked shut behind me, the atmosphere in the room changed. The polite suburban facade vanished instantly. We need to talk about last night, William said. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was coping with the shock of a federal visit. He skipped the pleasantries entirely. I walked to the head of the conference table and remained standing. What is there to talk about, Dad? I pulled up the state registry last night. I saw the operating agreement for Apex Consulting. I saw the SBA loan disbursements. You forged my signature to steal $150,000 from the government. Susan let out a sharp, dramatic gasp. She brought a manicured hand to her chest. Do not use that word, Natalie, she scolded. Stole is such an ugly accusation. We did not steal anything. It was a family survival strategy. I stared at her, trying to comprehend the sheer scale of her delusion. A family survival strategy, I echoed. My voice was dangerously flat. You committed federal pandemic relief fraud. You used my Social Security number to secure a loan for a ghost company. Susan leaned forward in her chair. The familiar manipulation tactics began to unfold. She narrowed her eyes, narrowing the distance between us. The world was shutting down Natalie. The economy was in free fall. Your brother invested all his savings into a new commercial project right before the lockdown hit. The market tanked. He was going to lose everything. He was on the verge of ruin. We had to do something to protect him. We had to keep his investments afloat until the market recovered. So you ruined me instead, I countered. You sacrificed my future to buy Derek more time. Again. William stepped away from the window. He moved closer to the table, using his physical size to dominate the conversation space. Let us look at the bigger picture here, he rumbled. His voice carried the same patronizing authority he used when I was a teenager. You are the CEO of a successful firm. You pull in 6 figures a year. You have a pristine reputation and 0 debt. You are in a position to absorb this minor financial setback. Your brother is not. A fraud investigation would destroy him. He would never recover. My jaw clenched so hard, my teeth ached. A minor financial setback, I repeated. My pulse hammered behind my ears. Dad, the IRS is demanding repayment with penalties and interest. They are threatening criminal charges. If I claim that loan was legitimate, I become an accessory to a felony. I could lose my business license. I could go to prison. Susan let out a wet, pathetic sob. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing a single tear to roll down her powdered cheek. She weaponized her sadness with expert precision. We gave you everything, she cried. Her voice cracked, trembling with manufactured grief. We put a roof over your head. We clothed you. We fed you. We raised you to be a strong, independent woman. You owe us for the sacrifices we made. We are asking you for one favor, to save this family from total destruction. How can you be so selfish? You owe us. The words hung in the empty air of the conference room. They expected me to pay the ultimate price for the very privilege of existing in their household. They sat in my beautiful Chicago office, surrounded by the success I built with my own 2 hands, and demanded I light it all on fire to keep the golden child warm in his basement. I looked at William. His jaw was set. I looked at Susan, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. They did not come here to apologize. They came to this office to gauge my compliance. They needed to know if I was going to fight back or if I was going to fold under the pressure of their guilt trips. If they suspected I was building a defense, they would destroy the computer hard drives in the basement. They would shred the remaining documents. They would burn the trail and leave me holding the bag. I had to play their game. I needed to feed them a narrative that made them feel safe. I needed a distraction. I let my shoulders slump forward. I allowed my defensive posture to collapse. I let out a ragged, desperate breath, forcing my hands to shake visibly. I collapsed into the chair at the head of the table, burying my face in my trembling hands. I cannot go to prison, I sobbed. The sound was muffled by my palms. I cannot lose the agency. The clients will leave. Everything I built will be gone. Susan immediately stopped crying. Her fake tears vanished, instantly replaced by a sudden, sharp attentiveness. The predator sensed the prey surrendering. "We are not going to let you go to prison, Natalie," she said. Her voice was smooth, reassuring, and entirely hollow. "It is just a financial misunderstanding. The government just wants their money back. We can work out a payment plan. We will even help you with the monthly installments once Derek's investments finally pay off." I lifted my head. I made sure my eyes looked wide and terrified. $150,000 plus federal penalties, I whispered. I do not have that kind of liquid cash just sitting in a bank account. I will have to restructure my entire life. I will have to hire a bankruptcy attorney. I will need to file Chapter 11 to shield my personal assets from the tax liens while we figure out a settlement with the IRS agent. William nodded slowly. A smug, satisfied expression settled over his features. The tension in his shoulders evaporated. He believed he had won. He believed I had accepted the burden. A bankruptcy attorney is a smart move, he agreed, very practical. Protect your assets, restructure the debt, and keep this out of criminal court. That is the responsible thing to do. We knew we could count on you to handle this maturely. Susan reached across the table and patted my arm. Her touch felt like ice against my skin. "See," she smiled, "everything is going to be fine. You always figure things out, Natalie. You are our strong, capable girl. We will let you get back to work. Just keep us updated on the bankruptcy filings. We want to support you through this difficult process." They stood up together. They smoothed their clothes, adjusted their posture, and walked out of the conference room. They left me sitting alone at the large glass table, believing they had successfully crushed my spirit. They thought I was a terrified, obedient scapegoat, preparing to sacrifice my career to save their suburban illusion. I waited until I heard the elevator ding in the hallway, confirming they had descended back to the street level. I wiped the fake tears from my cheeks. My hands stopped shaking. The manufactured panic drained from my body, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. I did not need a bankruptcy attorney. I needed a predator of my own. I needed a lawyer who specialized in dismantling federal tax fraud. But to hire one, I needed to know exactly what kind of physical assets the forged loan had purchased. I grabbed my car keys. I needed to pay a sudden, unexpected visit to the suburbs while they thought I was crying in my office. The drive back to the Illinois suburbs took 45 minutes. I used the time to let the fake tears dry on my face. I needed to maintain the illusion of a broken woman preparing to surrender her assets. My parents had returned to their house after our morning meeting. I sent a brief text message to my mother stating I was coming over to collect the physical loan paperwork for my new bankruptcy attorney. She replied with a red heart emoji. The digital affection turned my stomach. I turned my sedan onto their quiet, tree-lined street. The neighborhood consisted of manicured lawns and identical brick facades. It was an enclave designed to project success and stability. I pulled up to the curb in front of my childhood home and shifted the car into park. My hands froze on the steering wheel. I stared through the windshield at the concrete driveway. Parked right in front of the garage doors sat a brand new, pearl white Tesla. The sleek electric vehicle gleamed under the midday sun. It looked like a spaceship dropped into a mundane suburban setting. A custom charging station was bolted to the exterior brick wall, indicating this was a permanent installation. I knew my father drove a reliable domestic sedan. I knew my mother drove a practical SUV. I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the digital file I had downloaded from the state business portal the night before. I scrolled past the forged operating agreement and the fraudulent pandemic relief loan application. I found the section detailing corporate expenditures. There it was, a vehicle lease agreement dated 6 months ago. The paperwork listed the pearl white Tesla by its exact vehicle identification number. The lessee was Apex Consulting. The signature at the bottom of the page belonged to me. The monthly payments were exorbitant. My stolen identity was funding a luxury electric car. I opened my car door and stepped onto the pavement. The air felt heavy. I walked up the driveway, running my hand along the smooth, cool hood of the Tesla. The sheer cost of the machine disgusted me. I was facing federal prison time for defrauding the Small Business Administration, so someone in this house could pretend to be a wealthy tech entrepreneur. I walked up the front steps and pushed the front door open. The house was quiet. My parents were likely out running errands, celebrating their successful manipulation of my morning, but a familiar electronic noise echoed from the living room. It was the rapid-fire sound of a digital assault rifle and heavy synthesized explosions. I walked down the hallway and stood in the arched doorway of the living room. Derek sat slouched deep into the expensive leather sofa. He wore the exact same faded gray college hoodie from the night before. His bare feet rested on the mahogany coffee table. He was holding a wireless controller, staring intently at a new 80-inch flat-screen television mounted to the wall. The television was another new addition, another item purchased with stolen federal funds. "Hey, Derek," I said. My voice was calm. I kept the anger locked tight behind my ribs. He did not pause his game. He leaned into a virtual turn, mashing the plastic buttons. "Oh, hey, Nat," he mumbled. "Mom and Dad went to the grocery store to pick up steaks. They are in a really good mood today. They said you are going to handle that tax paperwork thing. Good looking out." I stared at the side of his face. He was 35 years old. He had no job. He had no savings. He had zero prospects. Yet he spoke about a federal tax warrant like it was a minor chore I was running for him, like asking me to pick up his dry cleaning. "I saw the white car in the driveway," I said. Derek grinned. He finally hit the pause button and turned to look at me. The glow of the massive screen illuminated his unkempt beard. "Yeah, it is pretty sweet, right? Dual motor, all-wheel drive, goes from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. It is a lease, but I am thinking about buying it out at the end of the term. How are you paying for a $1,000 monthly car lease, Derek?" I kept my tone conversational, inquisitive. He waved his hand in a dismissive gesture. "The company pays for it. It is a corporate vehicle. I need reliable transportation for networking events and meeting with potential real estate investors. You have to project success if you want people to take you seriously in the business world, Nat. You should know that. You own a PR firm." I looked at the empty energy drink cans littering the coffee table. I looked at his stained sweatpants. "You do not have a business, Derek. You used my name to steal pandemic relief money from the federal government. You forged my signature on a corporate lease." He rolled his eyes and let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. He tossed the plastic controller onto the leather cushions. "Why are you always so tense, Nat? Seriously, you need to learn how to relax. It was a victimless crime. The government prints trillions of dollars every day. They do not care about a tiny relief loan. And you were not even using your credit score anyway. You already have a car and an apartment. You have plenty of money." He stood up and walked toward the kitchen to grab another drink. He moved with a sluggish, lazy entitlement. "You are acting like we ruined your life," he called over his shoulder. "Just file the bankruptcy paper like Mom said and restructure the debt. It is just numbers on a screen. Stop being dramatic." I stood in the doorway listening to the refrigerator door open and close. The pop of a carbonated can echoed in the quiet house. Stop being dramatic. The family mantra. The ultimate tool of invalidation. Something fundamental shifted inside my chest during that exact moment. The heavy, crushing weight of family obligation simply evaporated. The desperate childhood yearning for their approval, the lingering hope that they might one day see me as a daughter, and the profound grief of their betrayal, all dissolved into nothing. I looked at the 80-inch television. I looked out the window at the gleaming electric car. I listened to my older brothers slurping a sugary drink in the kitchen. They did not view me as a human being. I was a disposable asset. I was a credit score to be harvested. I was a scapegoat, designed to absorb their failures. My entire purpose in this family was to burn myself alive so Derek could enjoy the warmth. The emotional trauma vanished. It was replaced by a clinical, icy calculation. The tears I cried in my office earlier that morning were the last tears I would ever shed for William, Susan, and Derek Grant. They wanted me to play the role of the sacrificial lamb. They expected me to hire a bankruptcy lawyer and quietly take the fall for their crimes. I would let them believe that illusion for a few more days. I would let them drive their luxury cars and eat their celebratory steak dinners. I would let them sleep soundly in their suburban beds. Derek walked back into the living room holding his drink. He picked up the video game controller and sank back into the leather sofa. "Do not forget to grab whatever folders Mom left on the kitchen counter for you," he said. He unpaused the game and returned his focus to the digital war zone. "See you later, Nat." I did not reply. I walked into the kitchen and found a small stack of bank notices sitting on the counter. I picked them up and placed them into my purse. They were useless to me, but taking them maintained the facade of compliance. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. I stood on the porch and took a deep breath of the crisp Illinois air. I was no longer a shocked victim scrambling to understand a sudden tragedy. I was a strategist. I had a clear target. I walked down the driveway, passing the pearl white Tesla. I did not feel anger looking at it anymore. It was just another piece of evidence. I climbed into my own sedan and started the engine. I pulled away from the curb and drove back toward the city skyline. I did not need a bankruptcy attorney. I needed a predator. I needed someone who understood the dark, intricate architecture of federal tax law. I pulled my phone from my purse and dialed a very specific number. The time for crying was over. It was time to build a guillotine. I parked my sedan in a subterranean garage on Wacker Drive. The polished brass plaque outside the 70-story glass high-rise did not advertise a standard corporate law firm. It read Vargas & Associates, Federal Criminal Defense and Tax Litigation. I bypassed the bankruptcy attorneys entirely. My parents wanted me to walk into a courtroom and fall on my sword for them. They expected me to publicly declare financial ruin. Instead, I stepped onto an express elevator and rode it to the top floor. The reception area was devoid of warm colors or welcoming artwork. It was designed with brushed steel dark slate and unforgiving fluorescent lighting. The environment projected intimidation. It was a place where white-collar criminals came when they ran out of lies. Jessica Vargas did not do small talk. She was a former federal prosecutor turned defense attorney. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and her dark hair was cut in a severe angular bob. When I walked into her corner office, she did not offer me coffee or ask about my day. She simply pointed to the empty leather chair positioned across from her expansive oak desk. "Sit," she instructed. "Walk me through the timeline." I sat down. I opened my purse and withdrew the manila tax warrant I had received the night before. I placed it on her desk. Beside it, I stacked the printed copies of the forged LLC operating agreement and the Paycheck Protection Program loan disbursement forms. Jessica picked up a silver fountain pen. She began reading. She did not express shock. She did not gasp or cover her mouth the way my mother had. Her eyes tracked back and forth across the federal ink with the cold precision of a surgeon evaluating an X-ray. The only sound in the room was the steady ticking of a wall clock and the crisp rustle of turning pages. After 10 long minutes, she set her pen down. She folded her hands together and leaned back in her chair. "You have a very serious problem, Natalie," she said. Her voice was level and devoid of any comforting inflection. "You are currently the principal target of a federal fraud investigation. If we look at these documents at face value, you are staring down the barrel of 3 distinct felonies." She tapped the tip of her pen against the tax warrant. Number 1 is tax evasion. The phantom crypto gains funneled through this shell company generated significant unrecorded income. The Internal Revenue Service wants their cut, plus interest and severe penalties. She moved the pen to the LLC incorporation papers. Number 2 is aggravated identity theft. Using another person's identifying information during the commission of a felony carries a mandatory consecutive prison sentence. Finally, she tapped the SBA loan application. Number 3 is the heaviest boulder: wire fraud and defrauding a federal pandemic relief program. The government is currently hunting down PPP fraud with extreme prejudice. They are making examples out of people. If convicted, you are looking at a maximum of 30 years in a federal penitentiary. I kept my breathing steady. Hearing the charges spoken aloud by a legal expert solidified the reality of my situation. It stripped away the last lingering remnants of my suburban childhood illusion. "My parents want me to hire a bankruptcy attorney," I told her. They suggested I file Chapter 11 to shield my personal assets and negotiate a payment plan with the IRS. They want me to handle this maturely. Jessica let out a short, dry laugh. It held zero humor. She shook her head. A bankruptcy filing under these circumstances is a written confession. The moment you assume financial responsibility for this debt, you legally acknowledge ownership of Apex Consulting. You give the federal government everything they need to indict you. Your parents are not just asking you to pay their bills. They are asking you to put the handcuffs on your own wrists. I know, I said. My voice was quiet, but firm. I saw the leased luxury electric car in their driveway this morning. I know exactly what they are doing. I want to fight. I want to clear my name. Jessica studied my face. Her dark eyes searched mine, looking for any trace of hesitation or residual family loyalty. When you say you want to fight, you need to understand the battlefield, Natalie. The federal government does not care about family drama. They care about paper trails. If we deflect this investigation away from you, we have to point the spotlight directly at the people who actually committed the crime. She opened a side drawer of her desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She slid it across the smooth oak surface toward me. It was a standard government form. The header read, IRS, Form 14039, Identity Theft Affidavit. This is our primary weapon, Jessica explained. This document officially notifies the Internal Revenue Service that you are a victim of identity theft. It initiates a separate, specialized investigation. But you must understand the gravity of signing this paper. I looked down at the black and white text. It looked so mundane, just boxes to check and lines to sign. The moment I submit this affidavit to the Criminal Investigation Division, we cross the Rubicon. Jessica continued. Her tone grew even more serious. The agents will halt their collection efforts against you and pivot their focus. They will dig into the IP addresses used to file these forms. They will trace the bank routing numbers. They will investigate your parents and your brother. She paused, leaning forward. If we do this, Natalie, you are signing the arrest warrants for your own blood relatives. You are sending them to federal prison. There is no undoing this once the machinery starts moving. Are you prepared to do that? I did not flinch. I did not look away from her intense gaze. The memory of my brother sitting in front of his massive television, sipping a sugary drink while telling me to stop being dramatic, flashed through my mind. The memory of my mother crying fake tears in my office, begging me to save them, echoed in my ears. They are not my family, I said. The words tasted like ice. They are my identity thieves. Jessica nodded. A faint glimmer of respect appeared in her eyes. Good. Then we plan an offensive strike. But a simple affidavit is not enough. She tapped the forged LLC operating agreement. The government sees familial identity theft every single day. Parents use their kids' social security numbers. Kids use their parents' names. Usually, the accused party claims they had verbal permission, and it just turned into a civil dispute over money. The federal prosecutors hate getting involved in those messy domestic cases. If you walk in there and just point fingers, your parents will hire a defense attorney who will claim you were a silent partner in Apex Consulting. They will say you knew about the loans, and you are just trying to back out now that the audit arrived. How do we stop them from doing that, I asked. We force the government's hand with forensic science, Jessica said. We do not just give them a story. We give them irrefutable, physical proof. We need to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that your mother and father forged your signature on these specific federal forms. I looked at the clumsy signature on the SBA loan. I can tell you right now, that is my mother's handwriting. She always loops her letter G like that. Telling me is useless, Jessica countered. We need a federal forensic document examiner to confirm it. To do that, we need pristine, authenticated handwriting and signature samples from both of your parents. I can get you a birthday card, I suggested, or a recent holiday letter. Jessica shook her head. Not good enough. Anyone can trace a recent signature. We need historical samples. We need original documents signed by your parents from around the exact era you turned 18. The further back, the better. We need to show the forensic experts their established writing patterns over a decade ago to match the stroke pressure and habitual loops found on these forged incorporation documents. Do you have anything like that? Anything they signed a decade ago that proves a financial relationship? The room went still. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to slow down. A financial relationship from over a decade ago. The smell of industrial diner bleach flooded my memory again. The harsh neon light of the roadside sign. The crumpled dollar bills resting on a cold granite kitchen island. The harsh scratch of a pen tearing through carbon paper. I stared at the blank identity theft affidavit on the desk. A slow, steady rhythm started beating in my chest. It was the rhythm of a trap clicking into place. "I do," I whispered. Jessica raised an eyebrow. "You have historical financial documents bearing their verified signatures." "I have 4 years' worth of them," I said. My voice grew stronger. Every single week from the time I was 14 until the day I moved out, my mother forced me to pay her 30% of my dinner tips as rent. I made her sign a carbon copy receipt book every single time I handed over the cash. Sometimes my father signed them. I kept every single receipt. Jessica sat perfectly still. For the first time since I walked into her office, a genuine, sharp smile formed on her lips. "You kept rent receipts from when you were a child." I nodded. "They are sitting in a shoebox in my apartment storage unit." Jessica picked up her silver fountain pen. The energy in the room shifted from defensive planning to a predatory hunt. "Bring me that shoebox, Natalie. Bring me every single piece of paper they ever signed." I stood up from the leather chair. The heavy, crushing dread that had plagued me for the last 24 hours was entirely gone. I walked out of the law office and back into the bustling Chicago streets. The sun was setting, painting the skyscrapers in brilliant shades of gold and copper. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was a text message from my mother asking if I had found a good bankruptcy lawyer yet. I ignored it. I needed to get to my storage unit. I needed to dig through the dark, dusty boxes of my past. My parents thought my childhood obedience was their greatest asset. They were about to discover it was the exact weapon that would destroy them. The concrete floors of the basement storage facility echoed beneath my heels. It was a subterranean maze located 4 levels below my Chicago high-rise. Wire mesh cages lined the narrow corridors, illuminated by flickering fluorescent tube lights. The air down here tasted stale, smelling faintly of dry cardboard and cold dust. I stopped in front of Unit 412. I pulled a small silver key from my pocket and slid it into the heavy brass padlock. The mechanism turned with a satisfying mechanical click. I swung the metal grate open and stepped into the cramped enclosure. Stacks of plastic bins and taped moving boxes formed uneven towers against the walls. They held the archived fragments of my early 20s, college textbooks, winter coats I no longer wore, and framed posters from my first cramped studio apartment. I bypassed the larger containers and knelt on the cold concrete floor, reaching toward the very back corner. Hidden behind a bulky plastic tote was a faded orange Nike shoebox. I pulled it free and rested it on my lap. The cardboard felt fragile beneath my fingertips, worn soft by time and multiple relocations. I took a steadying breath and lifted the lid. The scent of aged paper wafted up. Inside lay 3 distinct stacks of documentation. I reached for the first stack. It consisted of half a dozen small blue receipt books bound by a brittle rubber band. The edges of the pages were dog-eared and yellowing. I snapped the rubber band and opened the top booklet. There it was, a pristine, chronological ledger of my teenage financial extortion. October 12th, 30% diner tips, rent payment. The amount was written in my own careful 14-year-old handwriting. But the crucial detail rested on the bottom line, Susan Grant. The signature was scrawled in dark blue ballpoint pen. I traced the ink with my index finger. The loop of the capital letter G was distinct, unnaturally wide, and sharply angled at the tail. I flipped the page. October 19th, November 2nd, December 14th. Page after page, book after book. Hundreds of individual receipts bearing my mother's habitual handwriting. Mixed among them were several receipts signed by my father. William possessed a heavy, rigid signature. Applying so much pressure, the pen indented the paper beneath it. I closed my eyes and summoned the mental image of the forged Paycheck Protection Program loan application I had viewed on my computer screen. The fake signature on that federal document flashed in my mind. The fraudulent Natalie Grant bore the exact same unnaturally wide loop and sharp-angled tail. Susan had not even tried to disguise her natural penmanship. She believed she was untouchable. These fragile blue booklets were the forensic holy grail Jessica requested. A certified government handwriting expert could lay these receipts next to the SBA loan file and prove the forgery in a matter of minutes. I placed the booklets carefully into my leather tote bag. Then I turned my attention to the second stack of paper inside the shoebox. These were thick manila envelopes sealed and organized by year. I opened the top envelope and slid out a stack of bank statements from the First National Bank of Illinois. The dates corresponded to the exact month I turned 18. The statements detailed my initial deposits from a work-study program at the State University. They showed my rent payments for an off-campus apartment. They displayed my grocery bills and my utility charges. There was not a single incoming wire transfer from William or Susan Grant. These bank statements were the secondary weapon. They provided an irrefutable paper trail proving my total financial independence. I had never taken a dime from my parents as an adult. I was never their dependent. This meant any tax return where they claimed me to secure a deduction was fraudulent. It proved I lacked any financial entanglement with their household, let alone a complex corporate partnership in a phantom consulting firm. I tucked the envelopes into my bag alongside the receipts. I had the physical ammunition. I had the paper bullets required to execute a flawless offensive strike. A sharp, buzzing vibration against my hip broke the quiet isolation of the storage unit. I pulled my smartphone from my jacket pocket. The screen lit up with a new text message notification. The sender was Susan. I swiped the screen to open the message thread. "Did you call a bankruptcy lawyer yet?" I stared at the glowing text. I did not type a reply. I needed to maintain my silence to let their anxiety fester. But my lack of response triggered an immediate escalation. The 3 gray typing dots appeared, vanished, and reappeared in rapid succession. My phone began vibrating continuously in my palm like a captive insect. "Derek is very stressed about this situation, Natalie. You need to handle it today. Why are you ignoring me?" "This is your responsibility. We raised you. You owe us this favor." I watched the messages roll in. The tone shifted from persistent nagging to a rising, frantic panic. Susan was losing control of the narrative, and it terrified her. She needed constant reassurance that her human shield was securely in place. When I refused to provide that reassurance, she resorted to her favorite weapon. You cannot just run and hide from your family. "If you do not call me back right now, I'm going to take matters into my own hands." The screen went dark for 10 seconds. When it lit up again, the words displayed sent a sudden spike of adrenaline through my veins. "I know who your top clients are, Natalie. I remember the names from your firm website. Harrison Industries, the Miller Group, Horizon Tech." I stopped breathing. She was naming the foundational accounts that kept my public relations agency afloat. "If you refuse to fix this tax issue for your brother, I will call their corporate offices. I will tell them you are having a severe mental breakdown. I will warn them their PR representative is unstable and facing a federal audit. I will ruin your little agency by tomorrow morning. Do not test me." I stood alone in the wire mesh cage, clutching my phone. A cold, profound realization washed over me. For 28 years, I lived in fear of my mother's wrath. I altered my behavior to avoid her sharp tongue. I surrendered my hard-earned money to appease her demands. I shrank myself to prevent her from destroying my peace. But standing in that dusty storage room, reading her direct threats to obliterate my livelihood, I felt no fear. I felt nothing but a dark, exhilarating triumph. Susan thought she was applying pressure. She thought she was forcing me into a corner. She had no idea she was handing me the final piece of the puzzle. The federal government requires intent to pursue criminal extortion and witness intimidation. My mother just provided both in a written, digital format. I did not reply to her messages. I did not engage in a defensive argument. I simply pressed the dual buttons on the side of my phone. Click. The screen flashed, capturing the threat against Harrison Industries. Click. The screen flashed again, securing the threat against the Miller Group. I methodically scrolled up, capturing every single harassing message, every demand for compliance, and every threat to my business. I gathered a mountain of digital extortion evidence. I forwarded the entire batch of screenshots directly to a secure, encrypted folder synced with Jessica's law office. My mother was actively trying to coerce a federal witness into assuming liability for a federal crime. She was tying her own noose, and I was more than happy to provide the rope. The phone vibrated one final time. A new message popped up at the bottom of the thread. The aggressive extortion vanished, replaced by a chilling, commanding tone. "Your father and I are hosting a strategy dinner tomorrow night at 7. You will be here. We hired a local lawyer to draft some paperwork regarding the LLC errors. You will sign it, and we will put this mess behind us. Do not be late." I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. I picked up my leather tote bag, feeling the heavy, reassuring weight of the shoebox evidence inside. A strategy dinner, a local lawyer, drafted paperwork. The strategy was obvious. They were setting up an ambush. They intended to corner me in my childhood home, place a fabricated confession in front of me, and use their sleazy attorney to bully me into signing away my freedom. They wanted to wrap the crime in a neat little bow before the IRS 72-hour deadline expired. I stepped out of the storage cage and snapped the heavy brass padlock shut. I walked toward the elevator, my heels clicking a steady marching rhythm against the concrete. I would attend their dinner. I would sit at their table and look their local lawyer in the eye. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of legal intimidation. They were about to learn I was no longer playing by their rules. The sun hovered low over the Illinois tollway, casting long, dark shadows across the pavement as I drove toward the suburbs. I parked my sedan on the street directly behind the gleaming, pearl-white electric car. The house looked exactly as it always did, a picture-perfect facade of suburban stability. Neatly trimmed hedges, freshly painted shutters, and a welcoming front porch. Behind that wooden door, my family was waiting to execute a legal firing squad. I pushed the front door open. The familiar scent of roasted beef and heavy brown gravy hung thick in the air. I walked down the carpeted hallway and stepped into the dining room. The stage was set with meticulous precision. My father, William, sat at the head of the long mahogany table. My mother, Susan, sat to his right, pouring a glass of dark red wine. Derek, my 35-year-old brother, slouched in his chair to the left. His plate was already overflowing with mashed potatoes and a thick cut of meat. Sitting directly across from Derek was a man I did not recognize. He wore a rumpled gray suit that fit too tight across the shoulders. His tie was loosened at the collar, and he smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. He possessed the tired, aggressive posture of a man who made his living bullying desperate people in small claims court. "Sit down, Natalie," my mother said. Her voice was bright and cheerful. It was a predatory sweetness designed to disarm me. We have so much to discuss, and the food is getting cold. I did not pull out a chair. I remained standing near the arched entryway, keeping my posture rigid and alert. "Who is the guest?" I asked. William gestured with his fork. "This is Mr. Caldwell. He is a local attorney, a friend of a friend. He handles complex business disputes. He came over tonight to help us sort out this silly tax mix-up and get everyone back on track." Caldwell did not stand up to greet me. He did not offer a handshake. He simply reached into his scuffed leather briefcase and pulled out a crisp white document. He slid the paper across the polished mahogany table until it stopped near the edge. He placed a heavy metal pen right on top of it. The clip of the pen pointed directly at my chest, like the barrel of a loaded weapon. I looked down at the paper. The header read, "Sworn Affidavit of Error and Assumption of Liability." The text was dense with localized legal jargon, but the core message was painfully clear. It was a drafted confession. It stated that I, Natalie Grant, acting as the sole proprietor and managing director of Apex Consulting, acknowledge full responsibility for all corporate bookkeeping errors and misallocated federal relief funds. Earlier that afternoon, Jessica had briefed me on the strict eavesdropping laws in the state of Illinois. Hidden audio recordings in private spaces require two-party consent unless specific legal conditions are met. But there was a simple, elegant loophole. You just had to announce the recording out loud. If the other parties heard the announcement, stayed in the room, and continued talking, they provided implied legal consent. I reached into my leather tote bag. My fingers brushed against the smooth glass of my smartphone. I pulled the device out and set it face up on the table, right next to the fraudulent affidavit. I pressed the red circular icon on the screen. The audio application sparked to life. A digital timer began ticking upward in bright white numbers, recording every sound in the room. I looked directly at the cheap local lawyer, then shifted my gaze to my parents. "I am recording this conversation for my personal records," I said. My voice was loud, clear, and unwavering. Susan rolled her eyes and let out a sharp, dramatic sigh. She took a sip of her wine, shaking her head. "Always so theatrical, Natalie. Record whatever you want. We are just having a private family discussion about finances." Caldwell scoffed. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his rumpled suit jacket. "Record away, kid," he muttered. A voice memo on a cell phone does not change the legal facts printed on that paper. A profound sense of dramatic irony washed over my entire body. They sat there, so arrogant, so incredibly confident in their localized suburban power. They believed they were trapping a frightened, obedient girl. They had no idea they were sitting in a room with a hostile federal witness. They had no idea the audio file currently capturing their voices would be sitting on the desk of an IRS criminal investigation agent by tomorrow morning. Caldwell tapped a thick finger against the table. "The situation is very simple, Natalie. Your parents explained the misunderstanding to me. You started a consulting firm a few years ago. The pandemic hit and things got chaotic. Corporate paperwork got sloppy. The revenue agency flagged the discrepancies. If you sign this affidavit, assuming the liability, I can negotiate a clean settlement with the assigned field agent. We avoid a drawn-out court battle. We keep your name out of the public record, and everyone moves on." I read the document again. "This is not an assumption of standard liability, Mr. Caldwell," I said. "This is a written confession to defrauding the Small Business Administration. You are asking me to admit to a federal felony for a company I did not create." Susan leaned forward. She reached across the table and placed her warm, manicured hand over my cold one. "Natalie, please," she murmured. Her eyes softened, deploying that fake, nurturing gaze she perfected over 3 decades. "We will not let you fall into crippling debt. Your father and I will make the monthly payments to the IRS behind the scenes. We promise. You just need to be the official name on the settlement account. You have the clean background and the pristine credit score. You can survive a minor credit ding. We are a family. We protect each other in times of crisis. I pulled my hand away from hers, breaking the physical contact. If we protect each other, Mom, why is Derek's name not printed on this confession? Why did you not forge his signature on the pandemic relief loan application? Across the table, my older brother sawed a piece of medium-rare steak with a serrated knife. Red juices pooled on his white china plate. He did not look up from his meal. "Hey, Mom, pass the salt," he mumbled, chewing loudly. "This meat needs more seasoning." The casual, everyday cruelty of the moment stole my breath. I was fighting for my basic freedom. I was staring down decades in a federal penitentiary, and my 35-year-old brother was annoyed about the lack of seasoning on his free dinner. He was entirely indifferent to my impending sacrifice. He expected it, just like he expected his laundry to be washed and his luxury car to be fueled. I pushed the unsigned affidavit back toward the lawyer. The paper slid across the mahogany. I am not signing a confession for a ghost company I did not register. I am not taking the fall for your theft. The fake sweetness vanished from my mother's face instantly. The nurturing parent evaporated, leaving only a cold, calculating extortionist. Her lips thinned into a hard, rigid line. "You are making a very large mistake, little girl," she hissed. "You think you are so untouchable sitting up in your fancy Chicago office. You think you do not need us." William slammed his heavy fist onto the table. The silverware rattled sharply against the ceramic plates. "You will sign that paper, Natalie," he ordered. His voice shook the glass chandelier above us. "You owe this family your life. We are not going to lose our home because you decided to play the ungrateful victim." Susan pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "I sent you a text message yesterday, Natalie. I meant every single word of it. If you walk out of this room without signing that document, I am calling the CEO of Harrison Industries tomorrow morning. Then I will call the executive board at the Miller Group. I will tell your biggest clients you are mentally unstable. I will tell them you are currently under federal investigation for severe tax fraud. I will burn your public relations agency to the ground before lunch break. Do not test my resolve." They laid their final aggressive cards on the table. They expected me to crumble under the heavy weight of their blackmail. They expected the obedient daughter to emerge crying and desperate to save her career. I looked down at the ticking timer on my phone screen. The bright digital numbers proved their extortion was permanently secured. They just handed me the final nail for their own coffin. I reached out and picked up my smartphone. I slid the device securely back into my leather purse. The air in the dining room grew incredibly heavy. The tension turned thick and suffocating. William realized I was not reaching for the pen. He stood up from his chair. His broad shoulders blocked the ambient light spilling in from the hallway. He took 2 heavy steps backward, positioning his imposing physical frame directly in front of the dining room exit. The only way out of the room was through him. My father stood rigid in the arched entryway. His broad shoulders filled the wooden frame from edge to edge, blocking the ambient light spilling in from the front corridor. He crossed his arms over his chest, planting his feet firmly into the carpet. The physical blockade was not a new tactic. It was a terrifying echo, plucked directly from my teenage years. I remembered being 16 years old, trying to walk away from a suffocating lecture about my supposed selfish attitude. He had blocked my bedroom exit in this exact same manner, using his imposing size to enforce my submission. He believed his physical presence was enough to break my willpower. "You are not leaving this house until you sign that paper, Natalie," he growled. His voice dropped an octave, vibrating with a dark, heavy resonance. "We are done playing these childish games. You will sit back down in your chair. You will pick up that pen, and you will fix the disaster you are causing this family." I remained standing. My heart beat a steady, controlled rhythm against my ribs. I did not step backward. I refused to break eye contact with the man trying to imprison me in a suburban dining room. From the other side of the mahogany table, Susan erupted. The last remaining fragments of her maternal facade shattered into a million jagged pieces. She pushed her chair back so hard it scraped a harsh, shrill note against the hardwood floor. She pointed a trembling finger toward my face. Her features contorted into a mask of pure, venomous rage. "You ungrateful, spoiled little brat," she screamed. The volume of her voice made the crystal wine glasses rattle. "I gave you life. I fed you. I kept a roof over your head. If you walk out that door right now, I swear to you I will destroy everything you have ever built. I will call Harrison Industries at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I will tell their board of directors that you are a clinical narcissist under federal investigation for stealing pandemic relief funds. I will burn your public relations firm to the ground. You will be unemployable in the city of Chicago before lunchtime." The threats hung in the stale dining room air. The scent of roasted beef and cooling gravy suddenly made me nauseous. I glanced at my older brother. Derek had finally stopped chewing his steak. He rested his fork against his china plate and stared at me with wide, nervous eyes. The protective bubble of his apathy had finally popped. He sensed the shifting current in the room, but remained entirely silent, letting our parents do the dirty work required to protect his luxury lifestyle. Mr. Caldwell, the local attorney, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He loosened his cheap necktie and cleared his throat. "Now listen here, Natalie," he started, attempting to project a calm, authoritative demeanor. "Your parents are upset, tempers are running hot, but the core facts remain identical. If you step through that doorway without signing the liability assumption, you are forcing this situation into a very ugly public legal arena. Nobody wants that. Just sign the document and we can de-escalate the entire evening." I let a long stretch of silence wash over the room. I let them savor their perceived victory. I let them believe their combined tactics of physical intimidation, verbal blackmail, and sleazy legal pressure had successfully corralled the scapegoat into the slaughterhouse. Then I reached into my open leather tote bag. My fingers found the smooth, cool glass of my smartphone. I pulled the device out and held it up chest high. The screen glowed brightly, illuminating the dim space between us. A digital waveform pulsed across the display, tracking the ambient noise in the room. A timer at the top corner read 42 minutes and 15 seconds. I pressed my thumb against the bright red square in the center of the screen. A sharp digital chime echoed through the room. The pulsating waveform instantly flattened into a straight, silent line. A new icon appeared indicating an audio file was generating and saving to the device hard drive. Susan stopped mid-breath. Her raised finger slowly lowered. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice losing its venomous edge and dropping into a confused falsetto. I looked directly at the rumpled lawyer. "Mr. Caldwell," I began, my tone conversational and icy. "Are you familiar with the state of Illinois wiretapping statutes, specifically the clauses regarding two-party consent in private residences?" Caldwell blanched. The artificial tan on his face seemed to drain away. "Yes," he stammered, "it is illegal to record a private conversation without the explicit permission of all participating parties." "That is mostly correct," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on his terrified expression. "However, there is a well-established legal exception. If one party explicitly announces that a recording is taking place and the other parties hear the announcement but choose to remain in the room and continue speaking, they have provided implied legal consent." I turned my gaze toward my mother, who was now gripping the edge of the dining table for physical support. When I walked into this room 42 minutes ago, I placed my phone on the table. I stated loudly and clearly that I was recording this conversation for my personal records. You rolled your eyes and mocked me. Mr. Caldwell told me a voice memo would not change the facts. None of you asked me to stop recording. None of you left the room. The realization hit the dining room like a physical shockwave. "What exactly did you just record?" Natalie William asked from the doorway. His voice was no longer a menacing growl. It was a hollow, breathless whisper. "I recorded everything," I told him. "I recorded Mr. Caldwell presenting a drafted confession for a federal crime I did not commit. I recorded my mother detailing a specific, premeditated plan to contact my corporate clients and sabotage my business with malicious lies. I recorded a textbook undeniable attempt at extortion and witness intimidation." Caldwell scrambled out of his chair. The legs of the wooden seat clattered against the floorboards. He grabbed his scuffed leather briefcase and began shoving his loose papers inside with frantic, uncoordinated movements. "I was not retained for this," he sputtered, his voice pitching upward in sheer panic. "I was told this was a standard familial business dispute. I was told the liability assumption was a mutual agreement. I am not getting disbarred over a suburban extortion plot." He snapped his briefcase shut and bolted toward the entryway. William was still standing in the wooden frame. "Move," Caldwell shouted. He shoved his shoulder against my father's chest. "I am leaving. I am withdrawing as your counsel, effective immediately. Do not ever call my office again." William stumbled backward out of the arched threshold, allowing the terrified lawyer to sprint down the hallway and out the front door. The sound of a car engine revving to life in the driveway followed a moment later. Tires squealed against the asphalt as Caldwell abandoned his sinking ship. The united front was broken. The triad of abuse had fractured. I looked at my mother. Susan was trembling. Real, genuine terror radiated from her widened eyes. "Natalie, please," she whispered. "You cannot give that audio file to the authorities. They will arrest us." I turned toward the entryway. William stood near the hallway wall. He looked at my phone and then looked at my face. The broad, imposing enforcer who had terrorized my childhood was gone. He looked small. He looked old. He looked defeated. The digital shield in my hand had entirely shattered his physical threat. Brute force was utterly useless against a synchronized cloud server. I stepped into the arched frame. William shrank back, pressing his shoulders against the floral wallpaper, giving me a wide berth. I walked past him without breaking my stride. I reached the front door and gripped the cold brass handle. I pulled it open and stepped out onto the porch. The crisp night air rushed into my lungs, cleansing the stench of roasted beef and lemon furniture polish. I looked down at my phone screen. A small green checkmark appeared next to the audio file. The upload to Jessica's secure law firm portal was 100% complete. The extortion evidence was now sitting safely on a protected server downtown, far beyond the reach of my desperate family. I walked down the driveway, passing the pearl-white electric car one final time. I climbed into my sedan and locked the doors. The trap was irrevocably set. My parents had handed me the exact weapons required to destroy them. Tomorrow morning, my attorney and I would walk into the federal building and unleash a storm they could never outrun. The dawn broke over the Chicago skyline, painting the steel and glass architecture in harsh, unsympathetic light. I sat in the polished conference room of Vargas & Associates, clutching a lukewarm cup of black coffee. The digital clock on the wall read 7:15 a.m. Across the expansive oak table, Jessica arranged the physical evidence of my childhood extortion. She wore a navy pinstripe suit, radiating an aura of total, aggressive competence. Her sharp eyes darted between the stack of frail blue receipt booklets and the manila folder containing the forged pandemic relief loan application. "This is an executioner's blade, Natalie," she said. Her tone was clinical and precise. She tapped her silver pen against the faded cardboard shoebox. The handwriting samples provided in these childhood rent ledgers establish an undeniable chronic pattern of financial abuse. They provide motive opportunity and historical habit. Combined with the digital audio file capturing your mother's explicit threat to destroy your business, we are not walking into the federal building to negotiate. We are walking in to detonate a bomb. I set my coffee mug down. My hands were perfectly steady. How fast does the machinery move? I asked. When you hand a federal prosecutor a fully wrapped package of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and witness intimidation, they do not walk, Jessica replied. They sprint. The government is fiercely protective of Paycheck Protection Program funds. They want high-profile convictions to serve as public deterrents. Your family just served themselves up on a silver platter. She slid a single, pristine document across the table. It was IRS Form 14039, the Identity Theft Affidavit. Sign here, she instructed, pointing to the bottom line. I picked up the pen. I did not hesitate. I did not pause to mourn the loss of my biological relatives or wonder if I was being too harsh. I thought about 35-year-old Derek sitting on a leather sofa complaining about the seasoning on his steak while I stared down decades in a federal penitentiary. I thought about my father blocking the dining room door using his sheer physical mass to terrorize me into a false confession. I thought about my mother threatening to obliterate my public relations agency because I refused to be a human shield for her golden boy. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. The ink dried rapidly. The legal boundary was established. I was no longer the primary suspect in an SBA fraud investigation. I was now a cooperating federal witness and a documented victim of identity theft. Get your coat, Jessica said, scooping the paperwork and the shoebox into her leather litigation briefcase. We have a 9 o'clock appointment with the Criminal Investigation Division. The federal building downtown was a towering monolith of gray concrete and tinted glass. The security checkpoints were rigorous. We walked past armed guards' metal detectors and stern-faced receptionists. We bypassed the standard audit rooms where nervous citizens sweated over honest bookkeeping errors. We rode the secured elevator to a restricted floor. The conference room inside the CID wing was stark and windowless. 2 special agents waited for us. Agent Harris was a seasoned veteran with graying temples and a quiet, observant demeanor. Agent Cho was younger, sharp, and carried a thick legal notepad. They did not offer false pleasantries. They sat down across the metal table and opened their files. Ms. Grant, Agent Harris began focusing his gaze directly on me. You are claiming you had zero knowledge of Apex Consulting LLC. You assert your Social Security number was utilized without consent to secure a $150,000 federal loan. That is correct, I replied. My voice was even. Jessica took over, opening her briefcase. We are providing physical and digital evidence supporting those claims, she stated. She placed the shoebox of rent receipts on the metal table. She followed it with my college bank statements. Finally, she laid down a secure, encrypted thumb drive containing the 42-minute dining room extortion recording. My client was financially independent from her parents at 18, Jessica explained. She never received familial support. More importantly, the signatures on the fraudulent SBA documents are clear forgeries. We have provided historical verified handwriting samples from her mother, Susan Grant, dating back a decade. Agent Cho leaned forward, inspecting the faded blue receipt booklets. These are rent receipts, he noted. His brow furrowed in mild confusion. Issued to a 14-year-old child? Yes, I said softly. My mother demanded 30% of my minimum wage diner tips to exist in my childhood bedroom. I forced her to sign a receipt for every cash transaction. Agent Harris exchanged a brief, unreadable glance with Agent Cho. The seasoned investigator recognized the underlying psychology immediately. He saw the cold, clinical mechanics of a family that viewed their daughter as a financial instrument rather than a human being. Listen to the audio file, Jessica instructed, sliding the thumb drive closer to the agents. You will hear Susan Grant explicitly threaten to destroy my client's corporate public relations firm if she refused to sign a drafted confession for the PPP loan. You will hear William Grant physically blocking an exit to enforce compliance. It is a textbook example of witness intimidation and coercion. Agent Harris plugged the drive into his secured laptop. He placed a pair of heavy headphones over his ears. For the next 10 minutes, the room was utterly silent. I watched his stoic expression as he absorbed the venomous dialogue from my childhood dining room. I watched his jaw tighten when he heard my father rumble his physical threats. I watched his eyes narrow when my mother screamed her plans to sabotage Harrison Industries. When the recording ended, Agent Harris removed the headphones and placed them deliberately on the table. He did not say a word for a long moment. He looked at the forged loan applications. He looked at the childhood rent receipts. Then he looked at me. "We will submit these handwritten receipts to our forensic document examiners immediately," he said. "The process typically takes a few weeks, but given the clarity of the audio evidence and the magnitude of the pandemic fraud, we can expedite the review." He closed his laptop. "Ms. Grant, you understand that by filing this affidavit and providing this evidence, the focus of this federal investigation officially shifts from you to your parents and your brother." "I understand," I replied. "If the forensic analysis confirms the forgery and traces the IP addresses used to file these digital loan applications back to their suburban residents, we will be seeking indictments," Agent Harris continued. "We will seize the assets purchased with the fraudulent funds." "I understand," I repeated. He nodded slowly. A grim satisfaction settled over his features. "The government takes a very dim view of individuals who exploit relief programs designed to save struggling businesses. We take an even dimmer view of individuals who attempt to extort federal witnesses to cover their tracks." The meeting concluded with terrifying bureaucratic efficiency. I walked out of the monolithic concrete building and back into the bustling Chicago morning. The air felt lighter. My chest expanded freely for the first time in 3 days. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in aggressive, silent legal warfare. Jessica and I returned to our respective offices and continued our daily routines. I reviewed press releases for my clients. I attended marketing meetings. I drank iced coffee and watched the city traffic from my high-rise window. But beneath the surface of my mundane corporate life, a massive, invisible storm was brewing. The federal machinery had been activated. I imagined the quiet, sterile offices of the Criminal Investigation Division. I pictured forensic experts carefully laying my faded blue rent receipts beneath high-powered magnification lenses, comparing the sharp, angled tail of Susan Grant's signature to the forged loan documents. I imagined cybercrime technicians pulling internet service provider records, tracking the digital footprint of the PPP application directly to a basement router in the Illinois suburbs. Warrants were drafted in absolute silence. Subpoenas were signed by federal judges in closed chambers. The trap was expanding, growing sharper and more dangerous with every passing hour. My parents remained completely ignorant of the impending devastation. They sent me several passive-aggressive text messages complaining about my abrupt departure from the dining room. They assumed my silence meant I was pouting. They believed their local lawyer had merely suffered a sudden panic attack, and that I was still a cowed, obedient daughter slowly accepting my inevitable sacrifice. They thought the game was over. They were sitting in their manicured suburban home admiring their leased luxury electric car, oblivious to the crushing weight of the federal government currently hovering directly above their roof. They slept soundly in their beds, unaware that the quiet, obedient scapegoat they had tormented for 2 decades was currently directing a synchronized legal airstrike against their entire existence. 2 weeks passed in agonizing silence. The federal investigation moved like a deep-sea current invisible from the surface, but carrying immense destructive power. I continued managing my public relations firm, checking my secure email portal every morning for updates from Jessica. My parents interpreted my total lack of communication as a surrender. They assumed the obedient scapegoat was simply hiding in her Chicago apartment, too terrified to face the consequences of her rebellion. Then, a heavy manila envelope arrived via certified courier at my office reception desk. It was not from the IRS. It was from a new law firm located in a strip mall 3 towns over from my parents' suburban house. I sat at my glass desk and tore the flap open. Inside rested a formal subpoena for a civil deposition. My parents had apparently fired the panicked Mr. Caldwell after he fled their dining room. They replaced him with an even sleazier attorney named Richard Vance. This new lawyer did not bother with subtle manipulation. The accompanying letter was a blatant legal threat. He claimed my parents were minority investors in Apex Consulting and were preparing to file a ruinous civil lawsuit against me for gross financial negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. He demanded I appear at his office to provide sworn testimony regarding my alleged mismanagement of the pandemic relief funds. It was a bold, desperate bluff. They were trying to use the threat of a public civil lawsuit to bludgeon me into assuming the federal tax debt. They wanted to force me onto the record, hoping I would crack under cross-examination and confess to save my PR agency from the negative publicity. I scanned the subpoena and forwarded a digital copy directly to Jessica. My phone rang less than a minute later. "Do we fight the subpoena?" I asked, staring out at the hazy city skyline. "No," Jessica replied immediately. Her voice crackled with predatory anticipation. We lean into it. "This is a gift, Natalie. They are inviting us to a formal legal proceeding where every word is recorded by a court reporter. They want to put you under oath. We are going to let them put themselves under oath instead." 3 days later, I walked into the conference room of Richard Vance and Associates. The office smelled of cheap, stale coffee and strong air freshener. A massive faux mahogany table dominated the center of the room. A certified court reporter sat quietly in the corner, adjusting the keys of her steno machine. My family was already seated on the opposite side of the table. William wore a dark suit, looking stern and commanding. Susan sat beside him, her posture impeccably rigid, wearing a designer blouse, likely purchased with stolen federal funds. Derek slouched at the far end of the table, scrolling mindlessly on his smartphone, looking incredibly bored by the legal proceedings required to protect his luxurious subterranean lifestyle. They looked arrogant. They looked smug. They believed they held all the cards. They thought they were dragging a terrified, defenseless daughter into a room to finally break her spirit. They did not expect Jessica. My attorney strode into the room carrying a sleek black litigation briefcase. She wore a tailored crimson suit that screamed high-end corporate defense. She did not introduce herself. She did not offer a polite handshake to opposing counsel. She pulled out a chair for me and sat down beside me, arranging her notepad with terrifying mechanical precision. Richard Vance, the sleazy strip mall lawyer, adjusted his cheap silk tie. He looked visibly unsettled by Jessica's presence. He had likely expected me to show up alone, or perhaps with a timid bankruptcy attorney. He cleared his throat and addressed the court reporter. "Let the record show it is 10 a.m. We are here for the civil deposition of Natalie Grant regarding the financial mismanagement of Apex Consulting, LLC." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the fake mahogany surface. He locked his gaze on me, attempting to deploy a classic aggressive interrogation tactic. "Ms. Grant," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "you are the registered principal owner of Apex Consulting, correct? You executed the operating agreement and managed the day-to-day finances of the firm, including the procurement of a Paycheck Protection Program loan." Jessica did not object. She sat perfectly still, a faint cold smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She placed a restraining hand lightly on my forearm, silently instructing me to let them dig their own grave. "I did not manage Apex Consulting," I replied evenly. "I did not sign an operating agreement, and I did not apply for a federal loan." Vance scoffed. He pulled a copy of the forged LLC paperwork from his file and slid it across the table. "Is that not your signature on the bottom line, Ms. Grant?" "It is my name," I stated. "It is not my signature." Susan let out a sharp, dramatic sigh. She looked at her lawyer, then looked at me, shaking her head in manufactured disappointment. "Really, Natalie," she interjected, her voice capturing the perfect tone of a weary, long-suffering mother, "are we still playing this game? You begged your father and me for seed money to start this consulting business. You came to us during the pandemic, crying about your public relations firm struggling. You said you needed a secondary income stream." I stared at her. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. She was fabricating an entirely new reality on the spot, weaving a narrative where I was the desperate child and they were the benevolent saviors. William nodded in solemn agreement. "We warned her about taking government money," he added, his deep voice echoing in the small room. "We told her it was risky to expand during an economic downturn. But she insisted she could handle the bookkeeping. We just provided a little guidance. We never imagined she would mismanage the funds so severely and leave us exposed as minority investors." I glanced at the court reporter. Her fingers flew across the steno keyboard, capturing every single syllable. Derek finally looked up from his smartphone. He let out a loud, arrogant laugh. "Yeah, Nat," he chimed in, "you totally screwed up the taxes. You bought all that new office furniture, and now you expect Mom and Dad to bail you out? It is pathetic, honestly. You need to take responsibility for your own company." The dramatic irony filling the room reached a staggering, suffocating peak. William, Susan, and Derek were sitting in a recorded legal deposition, willingly testifying under penalty of perjury. They were explicitly claiming I managed the fraudulent company. They were actively stating they had detailed knowledge of the pandemic relief funds. They were weaving a complex web of lies on the official court record, creating a permanent, documented transcript of their deception. They thought they were building a civil case against me. They had no idea they were actively confessing to federal conspiracy and obstruction of justice in real time. Vance smiled a greasy, satisfied grin. He believed his clients. He believed he had successfully cornered a lying, negligent CEO. He turned his attention to my lawyer, expecting her to beg for a settlement. "Well, counselor," he said, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers, "my clients have made their position very clear on the record. We have the signed operating agreement. We have testimony confirming your client's mismanagement. If we take this to civil court, a judge will mandate restitution, and the public fallout will destroy your client's primary public relations agency. I suggest we halt this deposition right now and discuss a private liability assumption." Jessica did not respond immediately. She let the silence stretch, allowing Vance's arrogant demand to settle over the room. She picked up her silver fountain pen and tapped it twice against her legal notepad. The metallic clicks sounded incredibly loud in the quiet space. She turned her sharp, dark eyes toward the opposing attorney. Then she looked at William and Susan. Her cold smile widened into a full, predatory grin. "Mr. Vance," Jessica said, her voice dropping to a dangerously calm register, "I have allowed your clients to speak freely on the record because I wanted to ensure their perjury was thoroughly documented by the court reporter. You see, we are not here to negotiate a civil settlement. We are here as a professional courtesy to inform you that your civil lawsuit is entirely irrelevant." Vance frowned. His greasy smile vanished. "Irrelevant," he repeated. "What are you talking about?" Jessica reached down and unlatched her sleek, black litigation briefcase. The metal clasps popped open with a sharp, echoing snap. The true climax of the legal warfare had officially begun. The invisible federal storm was finally making landfall inside this cheap suburban conference room, and my family had absolutely nowhere to run. Jessica reached into her open briefcase and withdrew a thick stack of documents printed on heavy official government stock. She did not toss them casually. She placed them onto the faux mahogany table and slid them precisely across the smooth surface until they stopped directly in front of Richard Vance. The sleazy strip mall lawyer looked down. The header on the top page was impossible to misinterpret. It bore the heavy black seal of the United States Department of Justice. "What is this?" Vance muttered. His voice lost its arrogant swagger, instantly replaced by a sudden creeping hesitation. "That is a fully executed federal immunity agreement," Jessica stated. Her tone was razor-sharp, slicing through the stale air of the conference room. "It grants my client complete protection from prosecution regarding any financial irregularities associated with Apex Consulting, LLC. She received this immunity in exchange for providing active material assistance to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Susan let out a sharp, confused gasp. William gripped the edges of the table, his knuckles turning white. Derek finally set his smartphone face down on the table. Jessica did not give them a second to process the shock. She pulled a second set of documents from her briefcase and slid them toward opposing counsel. "Those are copies of active federal search and seizure warrants," Jessica continued, pointing her silver pen at the paperwork. "They authorize federal agents to confiscate all electronic devices, financial ledgers, and physical assets located at your client's residential address. The warrants also mandate the immediate impoundment of a specific pearl white luxury electric vehicle currently leased under a fraudulent corporate identity." Derek shot up from his chair. The legs scraped harshly against the floor. "You cannot take my car," he yelled, his voice cracking with sudden adolescent panic. "I need that car for my business meetings." "Sit down, Mr. Grant," Jessica commanded. She did not raise her voice, but the sheer authority in her tone forced my 35-year-old brother to collapse back into his seat. "You do not own a business. You own a massive federal tax liability." Vance pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose, leaning closer to the documents. He scanned the legal jargon, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "This is a federal probe," he stammered, looking from the warrants to his clients. "You told me this was a standard civil dispute over bookkeeping errors. You told me your daughter was a silent partner trying to back out of a mutual tax burden." "They lied to you, Mr. Vance," Jessica said simply. "And unfortunately for you, they just used your civil deposition to commit perjury on a recorded court transcript." William slammed his fist onto the table. The sudden impact made the court reporter flinch. "This is absurd," he bellowed, attempting to summon his terrifying enforcer persona. "My daughter managed that company. She signed those operating agreements. Any handwriting expert can look at those forms and see her name on the bottom line." Jessica smiled. It was not a warm expression. It was the look a predator gives its prey just before the final strike. "We completely agree, William." Jessica purred. "We specifically requested a federal forensic document examiner to review those exact signatures." She pulled a final manila folder from her briefcase. She opened it, revealing a series of high-resolution glossy photographs. She slid the images across the table, arranging them in a neat row. The first photograph displayed the signature from the fraudulent pandemic relief loan application. The second photograph displayed a signature from a faded blue piece of paper. It was one of my childhood rent receipts. Red circular markers highlighted specific pen strokes on both images, connecting them with rigid mathematical precision. The federal forensic examiner determined with 100% certainty that the signature on the Paycheck Protection Program loan is a clear forgery. Jessica explained. She tapped the glossy photos. Furthermore, the examiner concluded that the specific habitual pen strokes, the unnaturally wide loop of the letter G, and the sharp, angled tail are a perfect match to the verified historical handwriting samples provided by Susan Grant. The remaining color drained entirely from my mother's face. Her flawless makeup suddenly looked like a fragile mask cracking over a terrified, hollow shell. She stared at the high-resolution photograph of her own handwriting, proving she had robbed her teenage daughter to subsidize her adult son. "You cannot use those receipts," Susan whispered. Her voice was barely audible. Her throat seemed to close in on itself. "That is private family business. That is from years ago. It has nothing to do with this consulting firm." "It has everything to do with it," Jessica countered. "It proves a documented historical pattern of financial extortion. It proves you viewed my client as a disposable revenue stream long before you decided to steal her Social Security number to defraud the Small Business Administration." Vance, the sleazy lawyer, was sweating profusely now. Dark patches blossomed under the arms of his cheap suit jacket. He looked frantically between the forensic reports and his silent, terrified clients. He realized with horrifying clarity that he was sitting in a room representing active targets of a massive federal felony investigation. He had just facilitated their perjury. "Wait, there is more," Jessica said, holding up one finger. "My client is not just a victim of identity theft. She is also a victim of witness intimidation." Jessica pulled a small digital audio recorder from her pocket. She set it on the faux mahogany table and pressed a single button. The ambient noise of my parents' dining room filled the quiet conference space. The audio quality was pristine. "You ungrateful, spoiled little brat." The sound of Susan's recorded voice screamed through the small speaker. "If you walk out that door right now, I swear to you, I will destroy everything you have ever built. I will call Harrison Industries at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." The recording continued playing William's deep voice threatening my livelihood, followed by the undeniable sound of him physically blocking the door. Jessica pressed the stop button. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. "That audio file is currently sitting on the desk of a federal prosecutor," Jessica stated smoothly. "Attempting to extort a federal witness into signing a false confession carries an additional severe penalty." Vance stood up so fast his chair tipped backward and crashed onto the carpet. He did not bother picking it up. He frantically shoved his legal pads and his pens into his scuffed leather briefcase. His hands shook violently. "I am out," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at William and Susan. "I am withdrawing as your counsel, effective this very second. Do not call my office. Do not come to my firm. You lied to me. You used me to facilitate federal perjury. I am not losing my license to practice law over your suburban crime ring." He snapped his briefcase shut and practically sprinted toward the conference room door. He yanked it open and fled down the hallway, leaving his clients completely abandoned. The formidable united front of the Grant family collapsed instantly. The triad of abuse fractured and shattered under the crushing weight of undeniable federal evidence. William stared at the empty space where his lawyer had sat just moments before. His broad shoulders slumped forward. The terrifying enforcer who ruled our household with an iron fist vanished. He looked incredibly small. His large hands rested on the table, trembling uncontrollably. He could not stop the shaking. He was staring down the barrel of a decade in federal prison, and he knew absolutely no physical intimidation could save him. Derek, my 35-year-old brother, who had coasted through life on a cushion of unearned privilege, finally grasped the reality of the situation. The protective bubble ruptured. He looked at the forensic photos. He looked at the federal warrants demanding the seizure of his luxury electric car. He burst into tears. Loud, wet, ugly sobs echoed through the conference room. Derek buried his face in his hands. "It was not me," he wailed, his voice muffled by his palms. "I did not sign any of those papers. Mom did it. Mom set up the company. Dad approved the loan applications. They told me it was legal. They told me it was a tax loophole. I am just an investor. I did not commit fraud. You have to tell the agents it was their idea, Natalie. Please." He threw his parents under the bus without a single second of hesitation. The golden child abandoned his protectors the instant real consequences arrived. Susan stared at her weeping son. Her jaw dropped open in sheer disbelief. "Derek," she gasped, "how can you say that? We did this for you." "We risked everything to keep your investments afloat. We bought you that car." "It is your fault," Derek screamed, pointing a tear-soaked finger at his mother. "You ruined my life. I am going to jail because you got greedy." I sat perfectly still across the table. I did not speak. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I sat in peaceful, absolute silence, watching the toxic triad tear each other apart. They were turning on one another like cornered rats, desperate to save their own skin. The emotional chains that bound me to these people for 28 years dissolved completely, leaving me entirely free. The silence in my apartment that evening was profound. It was not the heavy, suffocating quiet of a family hiding secrets. It was the clean, expansive silence of a battlefield after the final shot is fired and the smoke clears. I stood by my high-rise window watching the city lights flicker to life. The legal mechanisms I activated with Jessica were now moving with terrifying, unstoppable momentum. My parents had spent 28 years building a fortress of manipulation and suburban prestige. It was about to be dismantled, brick by brick, in broad daylight. The federal government does not operate on a polite schedule. They execute high-profile warrants designed to shock and awe. They specifically chose Sunday morning. At exactly 8 a.m., a convoy of dark, unmarked SUVs rolled onto the quiet, manicured street of my childhood neighborhood. The peaceful suburban morning was shattered by the simultaneous slamming of heavy vehicle doors. More than a dozen federal agents wearing dark windbreakers bearing the bright yellow letters of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the FBI swarmed the property. I was not there to witness the physical raid. I did not need to be. The details were relayed to me later by a highly satisfied Jessica, who received the operational report directly from the prosecuting attorney. The agents did not knock politely. They utilized a heavy battering ram to breach the front door, splintering the expensive oak frame. They poured into the hallway, shouting commands, securing the perimeter. They found my father William standing in the kitchen, holding a coffee mug, his face pale and slack. They found my mother Susan sitting in her silk bathrobe, frozen in sheer terror. And they found Derek exactly where he always was, asleep in his subterranean basement room, surrounded by high-end gaming monitors purchased with stolen pandemic relief funds. The agents dragged the 35-year-old basement prince out of his bed. They did not allow him to change into his designer clothes. They hauled him up the wooden stairs wearing nothing but stained sweatpants and a rumpled t-shirt. The harsh morning sunlight hit his face as they marched him out the ruined front door. The neighborhood awoke to the spectacle. This was the ultimate payoff. Susan had spent decades cultivating a pristine image among her wealthy, judgmental country club peers. She hosted garden parties and bragged about her successful entrepreneurial son. She weaponized her reputation using the threat of public humiliation to keep me obedient. Now her entire social circle stood on their manicured lawns, holding their morning coffee mugs, watching the grand illusion crumble. Mrs. Henderson from across the street watched as federal agents carried out boxes of financial ledgers and seized computer hard drives. Mr. Davies from next door watched as an agent slapped heavy steel handcuffs onto William's wrists, leading the former family enforcer down the driveway like a docile prisoner. Then came the visual centerpiece of their financial ruin. A heavy-duty flatbed tow truck rumbled down the quiet residential street. It backed up to the driveway, its diesel engine roaring. The operator attached heavy steel chains to the axles of the gleaming, pearl-white Tesla. The luxury electric car, the symbol of Derek's fake success, the machine funded by my stolen identity, was unceremoniously dragged onto the flatbed. The loud mechanical grinding of the winch echoed through the neighborhood, broadcasting their fraud to every single onlooker. Susan was escorted out last. Her hands were cuffed securely behind her back. She kept her head down, her unbrushed hair hiding her face, attempting to shield herself from the burning stares of the country club friends she had lied to for years. The social facade she valued above her own daughter's well-being was completely, permanently annihilated. The subsequent legal fallout was swift and utterly brutal. The federal prosecutors moved forward with a multi-count indictment, including wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and witness extortion. The sheer volume of forensic evidence provided by the childhood rent receipts and the audio recording left their newly appointed court-appointed defense attorneys with zero leverage. There was no room for negotiation. There was no plea bargain offered for the parents. The Internal Revenue Service immediately filed massive federal tax liens against the suburban house to recoup the stolen SBA funds, plus exorbitant penalties and interest. The liens superseded the primary mortgage. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings within 48 hours. The house where I spent my childhood scrubbing floors and paying rent was seized by the government. William and Susan were bankrupted instantly. Their retirement accounts were frozen. Their assets were liquidated to satisfy the federal restitution orders. They were forced to secure a tiny, cramped apartment in a dilapidated complex miles away from their prestigious country club neighborhood. Derek faced the harshest reality check of his entire parasitic existence. The prospect of serving a decade in a federal penitentiary finally shattered his delusions of grandeur. He, terrified and desperate, accepted a draconian plea deal offered by the prosecution. He agreed to testify against his own parents, detailing their exact roles in creating the fraudulent shell company, in exchange for a reduced sentence. The golden child, the boy who needed more time, threw his parents to the wolves to save his own skin. His reduced sentence still included 3 years of federal probation and mandatory participation in a victim restitution program. The judge mandated strict employment requirements. Derek could no longer sleep until noon and play video games in a basement. He was legally obligated to secure full-time, gainful employment and surrender a significant portion of his wages directly to the federal government. For the first time in 35 years, Derek Grant was forced to enter the actual workforce without a parental safety net. I sat in my Chicago office reviewing a quarterly financial report for my public relations firm. The afternoon sun warmed my shoulders. My business partner, Maya, knocked lightly on the glass door before entering. She handed me a fresh cup of coffee and a stack of new client contracts. "We secured the Horizon Tech account," she announced, a bright smile illuminating her face. "They loved your pitch, Natalie. They want to sign a 3-year retainer." I took the contracts and signed my name on the bottom line. My signature was smooth, natural, and entirely my own. No one would ever forge it again. No one would ever use my identity as a weapon. "Thank you, Maya," I said. "Let's schedule a kickoff meeting for next week." She nodded and walked back to her desk. I leaned back in my leather chair and looked out the window at the sprawling city. The crushing anxiety that had plagued me since the IRS agents knocked on that suburban door was entirely gone. The heavy, dark shadow of my family no longer loomed over my future. I did not feel a sense of malicious glee. I did not throw a party to celebrate their incarceration or their bankruptcy. I felt something much deeper and infinitely more satisfying. I felt profound, absolute peace. They had engineered a complex federal trap designed to destroy my career and steal my freedom. They assumed my lifelong conditioning as the family scapegoat would guarantee my silent submission. They underestimated the very resilience they forced me to build. I survived their childhood extortion. I built an empire without their financial support. I walked into their ambush and turned their own weapons against them. The machinery of justice had functioned with cold, mechanical precision. I was no longer a victim, scrambling to defend myself against phantom charges. I was a survivor who had successfully surgically excised a toxic infection from my life. The battle was over. The war was won. It was finally time to look forward, to build a new life unburdened by the crushing expectations of blood relatives who only valued me for what they could extract. 1 year later, the aroma of roasted garlic and fresh thyme filled my Chicago penthouse. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to the stale pot roast and lemon furniture polish that haunted my memories of the suburbs. I stood by my kitchen island pouring a crisp white wine into tall crystal glasses. Maya, my business partner, was laughing loudly at a joke told by our lead graphic designer. The room hummed with a warm, vibrant energy. There were no hidden agendas here, no extortion plots simmering beneath the surface of a holiday dinner. This was my chosen family. They sat at my table because they respected me, not because they wanted to harvest my credit score. My public relations firm thrived over the past 12 months. Without the heavy, dark shadow of my biological relatives hovering over my career, I poured my energy into pure expansion. We landed 3 major national accounts. My pristine financial reputation remained untouched by the federal pandemic fraud scandal. Jessica, my ruthless attorney, ensured the government records clearly reflected my status as a cooperating witness and a victim of identity theft. My parents and my older brother were reduced to footnotes in a closed Department of Justice case file. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the glittering grid of the city below. I took a slow, deep breath of the warm air. If you are listening to this story right now, and you are the designated scapegoat of your household, I need you to understand a fundamental truth. You do not owe your abusers a single ounce of loyalty. Blood relation does not entitle anyone to treat you like a disposable resource. When they call you dramatic or claim you are too sensitive, they are simply deploying verbal weapons to keep you obedient. They want you to stay small so their golden child can occupy all the space. Setting a boundary is not an act of betrayal. Walking away from a toxic environment is a necessary rescue mission. Sometimes you have to be the hero who pulls yourself out of the burning building. You have the right to protect your peace, your finances, and your future. Never let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is a selfish act. The people who genuinely care about your well-being will never demand you set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. The universe has a remarkable way of balancing the scales when you finally stop absorbing the consequences for other people. I witnessed that exact balance just a few weeks ago. I had to drive back out to the Illinois suburbs to sign a final piece of paperwork regarding the closure of an old bank account. The route took me down a very familiar stretch of highway. I found myself driving past the old roadside diner where I used to work. The red neon open sign buzzed with the same relentless glow from my childhood. I slowed my sedan and pulled into the dark parking lot. I did not turn off the engine. I just sat in the warm cabin and looked through the large, grease-stained front window. Inside the diner, the late-night shift was in full swing. The linoleum floor was slick with spilled coffee and melted snow. A figure moved slowly between the empty booths. It was Derek. He was 36 years old. He wore a stiff polyester uniform shirt and a ridiculous paper hat perched awkwardly on his head. His shoulders slumped forward, carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of a defeated man. His hands gripped the rough wooden handle of a commercial mop. He pushed the heavy wet string across the dirty tiles, scrubbing the exact same floors I scrubbed when I was 14 years old. There was no pearl-white electric luxury car waiting for him in the parking lot. There was no comfortable rent-free suburban basement to retreat to when his shift ended. His plea deal with the federal prosecutor mandated strict employment to pay off his severe court-ordered restitution. A significant percentage of his minimum wage diner paycheck was automatically garnished by the government before he even saw a dime. He could not quit. He could not run. He was trapped in a financial prison of his own making. The boy who needed more time had finally run out of it. He was learning the harsh realities of life 2 decades too late. I watched him wring out the dirty mop water into a yellow plastic bucket. He looked exhausted. He looked broken. I did not feel a sudden urge to walk inside and gloat. I did not need to rub his face in his own failure. My victory was not dependent on his suffering. My victory was the simple fact that his suffering was no longer my responsibility. He was paying the exact price for his own entitlement, and I was merely a spectator passing through. I shifted my car into drive. I pulled out of the diner parking lot and merged back onto the highway, heading toward the bright lights of the city. I drove away, free, unburdened, and victorious. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. Your support means everything. If this story resonated with you, or if you have ever had to build a fortress of boundaries to protect yourself from toxic family members, please hit that like button. Drop a comment below and share your own survival story, because reading your experiences helps others realize they are not alone. Do not forget to subscribe to the Eva Tells Stories channel for more stories about reclaiming your power. Remember, you own your future. Take it back. The story of Natalie and her family serves as a profound cautionary tale. It reaches far beyond the dramatic spectacle of federal warrants and repossessed luxury vehicles. Beneath the shocking surface of pandemic relief fraud and stolen identity lies a much quieter, insidious tragedy. It is a narrative about the slow, systemic failure of fundamental parenting. When we look past the flashing police lights and the shattered suburban illusions, we are forced to confront the daily, subtle choices that ultimately broke a family in half. The Grant household represents a dark distortion of the traditional American family structure. Instead of providing a sanctuary of mutual respect, they built a hierarchy of exploitation. Let us examine the philosophy of the golden child. In American culture, parents often place a high premium on providing their children with a softer, easier life than they themselves experienced. We want to shield our offspring from the harsh realities of the world. But William and Susan crossed a dangerous line between nurturing a child and disabling him. By allowing Derek to live rent-free into his mid-30s under the guise of needing more time, they did not protect him. They hollowed him out. A functional, traditional family thrives on shared responsibility. Every member must carry a piece of the load to truly understand the value of the shelter provided. When parents remove the weight of consequence from a young adult, they steal his opportunity to build resilience. Derek grew into a man who could easily justify forging a signature, but lacked the basic competence to wash his own laundry or maintain a legitimate job. The parents constructed a glass house for their son, and when reality finally threw a heavy stone, the resulting shatter was devastating. True family responsibility means allowing your children to stumble while they are still young enough to learn how to stand back up. It requires the difficult task of saying no so the child can learn how to survive. On the opposite end of this toxic spectrum, we find the scapegoat. At 14 years old, Natalie was scrubbing diner floors and handing over 30% of her meager earnings to her mother. Parents who enforce this kind of harshness often justify it under the guise of teaching financial discipline and preparing a child for adulthood. But true long-term guidance requires a foundation of unwavering fairness. You cannot teach honesty through extortion. Children possess an incredibly acute radar for injustice. When a young girl watches her older brother receive a brand new vehicle while she is forced to purchase her own survival under the same roof, she learns a very dark lesson about her inherent worth. She learns that familial love is conditional. She learns that safety is something she must buy rather than something she is freely given. A home must be a safe harbor. When parents treat their most capable child as a disposable asset or a financial insurance policy, they destroy the foundational trust that binds a human connection together. They breed a fierce survivor, yes, but they lose a daughter in the process. The resilience Natalie built was born from neglect rather than guidance. She succeeded in spite of her parents, not because of them. The American dream is frequently wrapped in the pursuit of outward, visible success. Manicured lawns, luxury electric vehicles, and prestigious country club memberships become the shallow metrics by which a family judges its own value. William and Susan fell deeply into this cultural trap. They prioritized the appearance of wealth and stability over the emotional reality of their own household. Emotional awareness means recognizing your children as independent human beings with their own rights, boundaries, and distinct futures. It requires the humility for a parent to admit when they are wrong, rather than dismissing a child's valid pain as mere drama. When a family loses its anchor of honesty, it becomes capable of unimaginable betrayals. Stealing a child's identity to fund a fraudulent lifestyle does not happen overnight. It is not a sudden mistake. It is the final destination of 1,000 small, daily lies. It begins the moment a parent decides maintaining a comfortable illusion is more important than facing an uncomfortable truth. The parents chose to sacrifice their daughter's future simply to avoid dealing with their son's failures. That is the ultimate betrayal of the parental duty to protect. Stories like this hold a mirror up to our own lives and our own choices. They ask us to evaluate the foundation of our own households. Are we building homes based on mutual respect, transparent honesty, and equitable expectations? Or are we constructing fragile facades waiting to collapse? We must ask ourselves if we are raising children who are prepared to face the world with integrity, or if we are enabling habits that will eventually destroy them. If you find value in exploring the complex, dark, and triumphant corners of human relationships, please consider subscribing to the channel Sophia Told Stories. We delve deep into the narratives that challenge our perspectives and remind us of our own remarkable resilience. Please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments section below. We want to hear your voice and your experiences. Parenting is a long, heavy shadow cast far into the future. Every choice a mother or father makes leaves a permanent mark on the generation that follows. Sometimes the most profound life lessons are learned not from the warmth of a loving embrace, but from the cold reality of a locked door and a forged signature. As you look around your own dining table tonight, consider the unseen ledgers being written in the minds of those sitting beside you. Who is carrying the heavy weight, and who is simply resting in the shade? The answers might surprise you. Sometimes the quietest, most picture-perfect homes are hiding the loudest storms, just waiting for a single federal knock at the door to bring the walls crashing down.